with everyone in a minute. Everyone in a minute. Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the life and the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. I apologize again for all of the glitches, and I appreciate greatly people staying aboard. I appreciate that. Okay, so okay, I'm going to start with if you've been in the previous classes, we've been doing a series of individual teachings from the Baal Shem Tov. Each one is somewhat independent of all the others. So I'm going to start with one that we hear this teaching all the time. And as I made a comment a couple of times, there are so many teachings from the Baal Shem Tov that are so widespread that we don't necessarily even know where it comes from. So one of the most important teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, I believe we've mentioned this already, but I have a reason for mentioning it now, is that everything in the Torah is everlasting and relevant to each person in every generation. Now, this is something we almost take for granted, but the Baal Shem Tov is instrumental in spreading this idea. And it's especially true because of the 613 mitzvot, only approximately 200 are in effect today. From the rabbis, we have thousands of halachas from the rabbis. But of the 613 mitzvot from the Torah, most of them are connected to the temple, are connected to the Kohanim, to the Leviim, to the Sanhedrin, to Eretz Yisrael, and especially the temple. And it's very appropriate today as a fast day to commemorate the beginning of the destruction of the temples, which both the first and the second temple were destroyed on the 9th of Av. But on the 17th of Tammuz, which is today, the walls were breached. And it took our enemies 3 weeks to get from the walls to the temple. So the 17th of Tammuz is the beginning of what we call the 3 weeks. Bein Mitzarim, the time between the fences, between two fast days. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that everything in the Torah, even if we don't do that mitzvah, is still applicable on a spiritual level to each and every person. And so all of Chassidut has followed that. And that's why when we learn the Torah portions, so many of the mitzvot have to do with different matters that we don't fulfill today. The question then becomes, why do we have to learn it? It's not applicable. But the Baal Shem Tov emphasized, he might not have been the first person to point this out, but he made it a major pillar of how we learn the Torah. That every mitzvah in the Torah, every story in the Torah, every personality in the Torah, every word in the Torah has application and relevance to us in every generation. Many people feel that the temples were destroyed 2,000 years ago. It seems so distant to have a fast day for something that happened 2,000 years ago. And yet, if we look at the situation in Israel today, in real time, the feeling that we need a fast day is very, very relevant. We have what to pray for. There is destruction all around us and threats all around us on a daily level. Therefore, fasting today, it's not just for the temples. It's not just because a Sefer Torah was burned. It really goes back in the Mishnah. The first thing that occurred on the 17th of Tammuz was when Moshe broke the tablets. And this represents what's called Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, the primordial event that happened when there was too much light and the vessels could not hold the light of creation. And the vessels shattered in the previous world of Tohu. Well, that paradigm, that model is replicated in the breaking of the tablets when Moshe came down and saw them worshiping the golden calf. The breaking of the temple is just a continuation of the same energy. And really, October 7th and everything that has happened since is a manifestation of the breaking of the tablets, the breaking of the temples. So this is coming from the Baal Shem Tov, that everything in the temple is relevant on a spiritual level. But here, what I just explained is not just on a spiritual level. It's in real time, the application of what the Torah is teaching us. Another teaching from the Baal Shem Tov that is always relevant is he made a simple statement: Ra kisei latov. Evil is a vehicle, is a platform for good. Okay. So this takes a bit of explanation, but we see it, let's say, in the story of Purim, where the story is the setup is quite evil. Haman wants to destroy all the Jews, and in the end, there's a nafochu. Everything gets turned around, and Haman is hung on the very tree that he prepared for Mordechai. And the evil gets turned into the holiday of Purim. That's a small detail. What the Baal Shem Tov was trying to teach is nothing can exist without the life force of God. It doesn't mean that God does evil. God creates the possibility of evil in order that human beings should have free choice. It's like a simple formula, but we struggle with it constantly that there is evil in the world, but from God's perspective, and we're supposed to be able to adopt God's perspective, that we see that the fact that we all have an evil inclination, that there is evil in the world, ultimately is for the good. I was just talking with Nachum before, and for those who have been following numerical gems in the Torah, one of the gems that I shared was that the name Avraham equals 248, and the phrase in the image of God, B'Tselem Elokim, also equals 248. And in fact, Avram is the archetypal model of the image of God. But we're told to reach the image of God. We're told, well, what does that mean? So there are many answers, but one of the main answers is that we, like God, have free will. From our teachings, angels do not have free will, and animals do not have free will. Animals act according to a pre-programmed nature of survival and pleasure. It appears that animals make choices, but those choices are bound by their nature of survival and pleasure. The human being has true free will. It doesn't mean that every human being exercises their free will, and certainly doesn't exercise their free will in a positive way. Many people abdicate their ability to have free will through all kinds of actions that they take that slowly erode their ability to make true choices. Though it's always there, but Maimonides, the Rambam, explains with the whole story of Pharaoh that when someone chooses evil over and over again, or chooses things that will limit their free choice, eventually it's either taken away, or for all practical purposes, they abdicated. So the Baal Shem Tov's teaching that evil is a platform for good, this is the Baal Shem Tov's ultimate confidence and trust and faith that eventually everything that God does is for the good. And even though the possibility of evil causes such problems in the world for us individually, nationally, and universally, nonetheless, all evil eventually will be seen to be a platform for good. And of course, right now in Israel, we are praying for this, and we're trying to see what's the good that can come out of these terrible events that began on October 7th. There's actually much good that has come out. There's much tragedy that has come out. But eventually, the Jewish people are a people of faith. We have faith that somehow this will be turned around and goodness will be revealed. We go on to another teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and it's based on the 121st Psalm, where we say, Hashem Silcha al Yad Yaminecha. God is your shadow on your right side. the usual translation or the usual literal understanding of God being a shadow is that God is a protection, that God is hovering above us, and therefore, as it were, he's directly over. So let's say the light of the sun casts a shadow. Again, it's imagery, it's a parable. That God is a shadow on our right hand. God is our protector. God is looking out for us. The Baal Shem Tov explained it actually quite differently. He says that what's the nature of a shadow? The nature of a shadow is that whatever a person does, the shadow mimics it. If a person raises their hand, then the shadow will raise its hand. It's like a mirror. Whatever you do, the mirror or the shadow will copy it, will mimic it. So the Baal Shem Tov says that when it says that God is your shadow, it means that the way that a person acts in the world will be mirrored by how God acts to the person, or how the world will act to the person. This is what's called mida keneged mida, a measure for a measure. That what we put out, we get back. In the modern language, it's called instant karma, but it's not always instant. Sometimes a person does something and they get a reaction immediately, or in a day, or a year, or 10 years, or another lifetime. But it will always come back in one form or another. So the way we look at the world is the way that the world looks back at us. But here the Baal Shem Tov is saying it's the same thing with Hashem. That if we are kind to other people, then God will be kind to us. If we exhibit great love to God, God will exhibit great love to us. The truth is God loves us all the time. But the question is it revealed? Is it explicit? Is it immediate? Just like, let's say, a parent always loves their children, but when the children act out and a parent has to either give rebuke or punishment or a strong reaction, one at that moment doesn't necessarily feel the parent's love. But that doesn't mean that the parent isn't loving them, maybe even more, by not letting it pass, by reacting in a way that will hopefully teach the child, will help the child in the right direction. This is one of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. God is your shadow on your right hand. Now, there's another teaching that we'll see is somewhat similar, but it's based on a different verse. And this is coming from Pirkei Avot, where it says, Da ma lemala mimcha. Know what is above you. So that seems like a simple statement, a statement we should understand. There's a God in the world. There's divine providence in the world. We actually wear a kippah to acknowledge da ma shelemala mecha. Know that there's something above you, and therefore we wear a head covering in a sign of humbleness, of recognizing we're not in charge of the world. We're not the ultimate say. The Baal Shem Tov interpreted a little different, as he did. I'll just mention that at some point we're going to get to Keter Shem Tov, and we're going to see the Baal Shem Tov was famous for understanding verses in a new way, in a way that had not been discussed before or seen before. So the Baal Shem Tov, and this is actually for those who were with us for the series of 70 Faces, or have the book, there's this idea, one of the methods of understanding deeper levels of the Torah is you change the punctuation of a verse. In other words, in the Torah itself, there is no punctuation. We have a tradition of how to read the sentences, but if you look in the Torah, there are no commas, there are no semicolons, there's no periods, there's no nothing grammatically like that. But we have a tradition to know how to read the Torah. So in Chassidut, and a lot of this is because of the Baal Shem Tov, he would explain a verse by changing the punctuation. So in this verse, he just puts a comma or a dash, and he reads it, Da ma lamala, know what is above, dash mimcha. It all comes from you. Meaning very similar to what we discussed about Hashem is your shadow on your right hand, or the idea of a measure for measure, a mida keneged mida, that the way we act is it's going to come back to us in one way or another. So know what is above you. It's really coming from you, mimcha. So here the Baal Shem Tov just puts a dash or a comma, semicolon, and he reveals a whole different level. Now this goes very well with the verse that we just learned, that God is your shadow. In other words, God reflects the way you treat God, the way you treat others, is the way that the world is going to treat you and the way that God is going to treat you. So this is really the same message, but the Baal Shem Tov learns it from two different verses. Now, here we're going to take the first explicit words that God says to Avram. Lech lecha. This is in Parshat Lech Lecha. Go out of your land and your birthplace and your father's house to the land that I will show you. These are the first words explicitly that God spoke to Avram in the Torah. And it's pointed out, Lech Lecha, it's a double language. It's actually the exact same letters. Lech Lecha is Lamed Chaf Sofit. But the usual way it's translated is you go. Lech Lecha, you go. I just learned from the Baal Shem Tov, I think everyone knows at this point that the deeper teaching here is that God is telling Avram that you have to go on a double journey. Lech, in other words, there's a certain journey that you have to take in the physical world by leaving your land, leaving your birthplace, leaving your father's house, and coming to the land I will show you. But at the same time, there's a parallel journey that you have to take, lecha, to you inside, a spiritual journey to one's soul. We've all heard this. Everyone's taught it. I've written about it. Everyone's written about it. But I was just learning one of Rav Ginsburg's books, where he attributes this to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. I actually had never seen that explicitly before. Now, again, it could be that someone else might have said this somewhere in history, but it doesn't mean that they made it in a way that it would spread all over Israel. We have to understand that the Baal Shem Tov began a movement that within a generation had spread throughout Europe, throughout Russia, and this was at the time the living place of a majority of the Jews. And the influence of Hasidut, of course, has spread into all Jewish learning. But this was the first time I actually saw it attributed to the Baal Shem Tov. So I wanted to share that because this is such a fundamental teaching about Avram Avinu, about Parshat Lech Lecha. And here Rav Ginsburg was saying, and I'm sure he would not say it if he didn't have a proper source for it. I will be looking for that source. On Sunday, for those who are at the class or those who missed the class, still can see it on YouTube or our website or on our WhatsApp. So we were learning about how did God come to choose Yoshua to be the leader and not Pinchas. This is Parshat Pinchas this week, and this is when Pinchas gets a covenant of peace. He's the only person in the Tanakh granted a covenant of peace after doing this incredibly brave and zealous action, which really saved Am Yisrael. So why wasn't Pinchas chosen? So we got into a whole discussion of the qualities of Pinchas and the qualities of Yoshua, and then showing that Pinchas also had Yoshua's qualities, Yoshua also had Pinchas's attributes, the secret of inter-inclusion. And I mentioned there in passing that one of the major teachings of the Baal Shem Tov that every person can adopt and try to integrate was the Baal Shem Tov said to all of us. He wasn't saying it in relationship to Pinchas and Yeshua. We just applied it to that. The idea of zirut b'metinut. Zrizut b'metinut. Zrizut means alacrity, having initiative, being strong and acting, of jumping in and accomplishing. Mebetinut means, Toby helped me the other day with the right word for it, with calmness, with thought,
restraint.
With restraint. I thought everyone was muted. Thank you, Toby. With restraint, but at the same time. And this is quite a feat, because most people, their natural tendencies is to be one or the other. Either people are very fiery and don't have a lot of patience, and for the good, that they're doers, they act, they don't hold back, they rise to the occasion. But the downside is sometimes people act impulsively and don't think things out. So everything has a possible positive and negative consequence. And the same thing with being having restraint and thinking things out and wanting to give things a lot of time. So sometimes that could be absolutely the right choice. instead of jumping into things without thinking too much about it, or thinking what the consequences is. One of the teachings in Pirkei Avot is Eza Chacham Haro'eh Nolad. Who is the wise one? The one that can see the possible consequences of an action. So this is for me, actually, on a personal level, this is a teaching that I try to deal with all the time. It's trying to find the right balance between acting forcefully, not, this was actually one of Rav Shlomo's favorite teachings, is when you see that the gate is open, then just kick it open all the way. It was one of his favorite teachings. The gate again it's a symbol, a parable. We'll call it opportunity. When opportunity shows itself and there's an opening, push it open all the way. We don't always have openings. New possibilities don't always come our way. So he would always teach, if a new possibility comes your way, don't sit on it. Act on it. But to be honest, that's not always the right thing to do. Sometimes a door opens and it's actually a test. And part of the test is not to push the door open all the way. It takes a lot of thought to know which one. So the same thing with alacrity and restraint, to know when is the time for each one of them, what's the proper blend. Another teaching I'd like to explore now is, we're told, and today is again a remembrance for the destruction of the temples, Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. I'll take this opportunity that everyone who is fasting, that they should have an easy fast, and our prayers should be answered. And we should be praying for solutions to our current challenges, our current problems and enemies. Ezrat Shem, God will hear our prayers today. One of the statements of the sages was, after the destruction of the temple and exile is in full force, most of the Jews are living outside of Israel at that point, that God only has in this world arba amot of halacha. In other words, the Shekhinah is also in exile. We have this idea that it's not just Israel that's in exile, but when Israel is in his exile, the Shekhinah is in exile. God, as it were, is in exile. And so therefore, what does God have left in this world? So the expression is the 4 amot, 4 cubits of halacha. This expression means that our ability to connect to God is going to come through halacha. By observing the halacha, that is our connection to God. That is our connection to God. As we can see, that the metaphor of this phrase is that the presence of God is very limited to the 4 cubits of halacha. 1 second. The Baal Shem Tov came and he has a whole different view of God's presence. His teaching is, and again, this is not a innovation in of itself of the Baal Shem Tov. The idea that God is everywhere, in every place, at every moment. So in a sense, that's a given. It's not like he was the first one to say it. But the way that he gave it over, the way that he inspired his students, the way that he taught over the idea of that God is available, God can be contacted, God can be clung to, what was so powerful that this call it philosophical worldview became a very, very important pillar of Hasidus and all of the teachings of the Hasidic masters. This is what is called Hashra'ah. That God's presence is available. And we learned from the Baal Shem Tov, and we learned already, so I'm just going to mention it without going back into it, that the Baal Shem Tov took the verse from Mishlei, B'chol dorachecha te'ehu, in all of your ways know him. The Baal Shem Tov is teaching that God's presence, God's energy, God's light is not just in learning Torah. Of course, he didn't minimize it. Of course, it's through Torah. And it's not just through prayer. Well, the Baal Shem Tov was the master of teaching ecstatic prayer. But he wanted everyone to know that God can be felt and experienced in all of our activities, all of our ways. That in work and in play and in the mundane world and the secular world, everywhere you turn and everything you do is an opportunity to come to know God and experience God. So here, the Baal Shem Tov was taking this somewhat limited idea of that God is only in the 4 cubits of halacha, and he wanted to expand that idea. Now, of course, the Baal Shem Tov understood the importance of mitzvot and how by doing a mitzvah, we come into direct contact with God. So he wasn't minimizing, but he wanted to expand that. And so since we're talking about mitzvot, so I'm going to give over two ideas about mitzvah. Also in Mishlei, it says, Chacham lev yikach mitzvot. The wise of heart will take mitzvot, meaning someone who's wise will attach themselves to doing mitzvot. A very, very simple idea that if you're wise, you'll do mitzvot. The Baal Shem Tov just pointed out that the plural, it doesn't say Chacham lev yikach mitzvah. A wise-hearted person will take a mitzvah. It's in the plural. Well, that's not surprising because that's simply the literal meaning. The wise take not just a mitzvah, but plural, take mitzvah. But the Baal Shem Tov said that in every mitzvah, there's 2 levels. In other words, when it says we'll take mitzvot, means actually in one mitzvah, there's two mitzvot. What are they? One is the act of doing a mitzvah. The other is the kavana of doing the mitzvah. Now here we have to explain that in a literal sense, mitzvot need kavana. They need intent. But the intent that is spoken about halachically is the knowledge that what I'm doing now is a mitzvah. And they actually explain that one doesn't have to mentally or through speech say, I am about to do a mitzvah. I am aware that I'm about to do a mitzvah. Nonetheless, we're told that that's what it should be. It should be anytime we do a mitzvah, we should have the objective kavana that what I'm doing now is a mitzvah. But the rabbis pointed out that in a certain way, the fact that we're doing a mitzvah means that we're aware that it's a mitzvah. And so even though we'll say in an ideal sense, we should intentfully have the intent that what we are now doing is a mitzvah, just the fact that we're doing the mitzvah means that we have an awareness that it's important that right now that we're doing this act, and it is a mitzvah. But the Baal Shem Tov wanted to add that in every mitzvah there are mitzvot. There's two levels. And the intent is not just that what I'm doing now is a mitzvah, but to have a spiritual intent along with the mitzvah. That's what the Baal Shem Tov was teaching. And this, of course, it becomes such an important part of Hasidic teaching. And of course, it is spread throughout Jewish thought. The idea of having a spiritual intent in mind when doing a mitzvah. And that adds immeasurably to the mitzvah. There's no doubt that even if one doesn't have a spiritual intent, there is, of course, tremendous importance in doing the mitzvah. That's why when, let's say it's asked, let's say a person gets up and they just don't feel like davening. It's just hard for them. They don't have it in them. So they could say, well, I'm not gonna have any kavana. I'm just not into it. Therefore, should I daven or not? And the answer is absolutely a person should daven. And hopefully, in the process of davening, that inspiration will come. And even if it doesn't come, it's important to do the mitzvah. I just picked the example of prayer, but we could use it for anything. It's Hanukkah, and it's the seventh night of Hanukkah. It's like, well, I'm getting tired, and I lit 6 nights already. I'm just not into it tonight. So therefore, I don't have much intent. I don't have much kavana. Therefore, I'm not going to do the mitzvah. So of course, we don't subscribe to that. We do the mitzvah. We do our best to have some intent. But even if we don't have intent, we do the mitzvah. But the Baal Shem is trying to teach that every mitzvah has spiritual content to it. And of course, this becomes one of the most important and fascinating and inspiring ways to learn how to do the mitzvah, to learn what are the deeper meanings. How does this mitzvah touch my soul? How does it add to the world? How can it help improve me? How can it make me a deeper person? How can it help me connect to God more? So this becomes such rich material in Hasidic teaching, and as we've said throughout Jewish learning now, the importance of knowing the deeper meanings of doing mitzvot. So while we're talking about mitzvot, I'll add one more idea here, and we will end with this. And that is, we translate the word mitzvah as commandment. And of course, that is a correct translation, commandment. But the Baal Shem Tov taught, and again, it's become this part and parcel of Jewish thought, that the same root of mitzvah, tzadi vav hey, in a different context means to connect. Savtachada, it means to make a connection. And the Baal Shem Tov was teaching that, of course, a mitzvah is a commandment from God. It's in the Torah. And ultimately, we do it because we're commanded to do it. But the Baal Shem wanted to point out that every mitzvah connects us to God. Not only does it connect us to God, it connects us to our own soul. It connects us to the world around us. And that's why virtually all of the mitzvot have to do with a physical action, a physical object, or speech. Because a mitzvah connects us to the world, to the physical material world. It also connects us to the spiritual world. It connects physical to spiritual. And that's why we're told, and this is also one of the major teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, that the purpose of the mitzvot are to connect physical to spiritual, to draw spiritual energy, godly energy, holy energy into the physical material world and into ourselves. We are the one doing the mitzvot. So this idea of connection, and it connects us to other people. There's so many mitzvot that have to do bein adam lechaviro, between a person and another person. And then there are mitzvahs bein adam lemakom, between a person and God. This is one of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, that mitzvot are connections, are deep, deep connections. So we'll end with a blessing. We'll end with a blessing that we can do like the Baal Shem Tov said, Chacham lev yikach mitzvot, that the wise of heart will take mitzvot, that each and every one of us should have the inspiration and the soul connection to the mitzvot, to be able to connect spiritual to physical, to be connected to God, to be connected to other people, and through our mitzvot to raise up the world. We raise up the world, and simultaneously we draw down spiritual, godly, holy energy. May we all be blessed to do this.